Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Ruth Watson. Here's the news from Broadcasting Scotland today. The Ukraine update, day 492. Ukrainian Deputy Defence Minister Hanna Maliar has repeated that Ukrainian troops are advancing in all directions of their counter-offensive against occupying Russian forces. If we talk about the entire front line, both east and south, we have seized the strategic initiative and are advancing in all directions, she told Ukrainian television. GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence agency, said today that Russia has been gradually reducing the number of personnel at the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station in southern Ukraine, and among the first to leave were 3 employees of Russian state nuclear firm Rosatom who had been in charge of the Russians' activities. GUR also said that Ukrainian employees who have signed a contract with Rosatom have also been advised to leave by the 5th of July and should head for the Crimean Peninsula. Overnight, the Russian army attacked military infrastructure facilities in the Zaporizhzhia region. Ukraine's Air Force claimed 4 S-300 missiles and 3 Shahed drones were fired, and Air Defence Forces shot down 10 drones. Ukraine's General Staff has claimed that it struck the headquarters and storage depots of Russian troops in the suburbs of Berdyansk. Video distributed on social media appeared to show smoke rising over the occupied city. In Kramatorsk, a makeshift memorial has been set up, carrying pictures of some of the people killed in a missile strike on a restaurant earlier this week. 12 people died and at least 56 people were injured, according to Ukrainian authorities. Russia claims it targeted a military target. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said today that he believes the West is aiming to freeze the conflict in Ukraine to buy time to pump more arms into the country. Wagner mercenaries, meanwhile, will no longer fight in Ukraine after Yevgeny Prigozhin refused to sign contracts with the Kremlin, according to the head of the Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Kartabolov. Poland has detained a Russian ice hockey player on spying charges, prosecutors said today, describing him as the 14th person that had been arrested from one espionage network. The Kremlin has declined to answer questions about the whereabouts of Sergei Suryvkin amid unconfirmed reports that the Russian army general had been detained and was being questioned by the security services about his knowledge of the Wagner mutiny. Ex-President Trump has said that Vladimir Putin had been somewhat weakened by Wagner's aborted mutiny. Republican presidential candidate Mike Pence met President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday during a surprise visit to Ukraine. Centrica boss has warned energy bills are likely to remain high. The chief executive of energy supplier Centrica, Chris O'Shea, has said household energy bills are likely to remain high for the foreseeable future as wholesale market prices remain at more than double the normal level. The UK continues to face risks to its gas supplies after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, according to Mr O'Shea. He said the first act of the crisis was over, but there was a danger that people could become complacent. He told the Today programme on Radio 4, "I think what we've got to remember is that energy prices have more than doubled before Russia invaded Ukraine," adding, "Now prices are back down to pre-invasion levels, but they still are 2.5 times the long-run average." Energy bills for 27 million households are due to fall from Saturday as the energy regulator, Ofgem, reduces the price cap to the equivalent of £2,074 a year for the dual fuel usage of a typical household. But the new price cap, which limits the maximum amount suppliers can charge for each unit of gas and electricity, is still about £800 higher than it was before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and is forecast to remain high at least until the end of winter. The cap is projected to fall to just over £1,870 from October, according to analysts at Cornwall Insight, then rise slightly from January next year to just over £1,900. Commenting, SNP Energy spokesperson Alan Brown MP said, "The UK government must listen to these dire warnings and urgently get its act together to secure our energy supply and lower people's bills." Scotland is an energy-rich country, but families are paying through the nose because the UK government has failed to invest in renewables, failed to match European energy reserves, and scrapped the household energy rebate in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The SNP is the only party offering real change and lower energy bills with independence, and energy independence is the key to securing prosperity and lowering bills in Scotland. Tory peer Zac Goldsmith resigns from the UK government. Zac Goldsmith has resigned as a minister accusing Rishi Sunak of being uninterested in the environment. The Conservative peer and former MP published a long resignation letter detailing his disappointment with the Prime Minister for causing paralysis on the environment within Whitehall and choosing to attend the party of a media baron rather than an international environmental forum. Rishi Sunak has hit back in a letter saying Goldsmith had been asked to say sorry for a tweet that appeared to challenge the Privileges Committee inquiry into whether Johnson misled Parliament. The Prime Minister said Goldsmith's comments were incompatible with his job in government and he had been asked to apologise but decided a different course. In response, Goldsmith said he had been happy to acknowledge he should not have commented on the Privileges Committee and denied this was the cause of his resignation. My decision to step down has been a long time coming. When I compare what I and my amazing team were able to do before the current PM took office with the slow progress today, it seems to me I can no longer justify being in government, Goldsmith said. Goldsmith's accusations are likely to be unhelpful to Sunak in the lead-up to an election, with opposition parties expected to emphasise the government's failure to do enough on the climate emergency, animal welfare and sewage discharges. In his letter stepping down from the Foreign Office, where his portfolio was overseas territories, Commonwealth, Environment, Energy and Climate, Goldsmith said he had been horrified by the Sunak government's abandonment of policies around animal welfare and that its efforts on environmental issues at home had simply ground to a standstill. Addressing Sunak directly, the Tory peer said, "Prime Minister, having been able to get so much done previously, I have struggled even to hold the line in recent months. The problem is not that the government is hostile to the environment, it is that you, our Prime Minister, are simply uninterested. That signal, or lack of it, has trickled down through Whitehall and caused a kind of paralysis." Commenting, the SNP's environment spokesperson, Patricia Gibson MP, said, "It's an indictment of the UK government's lack of ambition and action in tackling the greatest crisis we face when their own Environment Minister resigns with such a condemnation of the Tories' record. Scotland can be a global leader in the fight against the climate crisis, but it is increasingly clear that we need the full powers of independence to do so," she said. UK workers' rights. Global index rating falls. The UK government crackdowns on worker protections and the rights of unions have seen the UK's global rating on workers' rights fall, a new report has revealed. The International Trade Union Confederation has found in its 2023 Global Rights Index, in the United Kingdom, union busting, attempts to introduce legislation curtailing the right to strike and protest, and violations of collective bargaining agreements have become systematic and led to the country's rating dropping from 3 to 4. The shift in rating from a 3, meaning a nation is in regular violation of rights, to a 4, meaning a nation has systemic violations of rights, places the UK among some of the worst nations in the world for failing to adhere to basic workers' rights and protections. David Linden MP, the SNP Social Justice spokesperson, said the report paints a depressing picture of the reality Scotland should have been safe from and warned workers' protections could only be safeguarded with the full powers of Scottish independence. Commenting, David Linden MP said, The Tories' brazen attacks on basic workers' rights and protections have made it clear that only with the independence can we safeguard the rights of Scottish workers. Consistent Tory clampdowns on the right to strike and their attempts to rip up hard-won EU protections have resulted in the UK being placed among some of the worst offending nations in the world on workers' rights. That paints a depressing picture of the reality people in Scotland should have been safe from had we remained in the EU, or had Better Together bedfellows, Labour and the Tories, not blocked the devolution of employment law. SNP Treasurer confirms party on course to meet audit deadlines. The SNP has said it is on course to meet statutory deadlines for submission of audited accounts to the Electoral Commission. The information was confirmed following a meeting of the party's National Executive Committee on Thursday evening, which approved the accounts for 2022. The audited accounts will be published by the Electoral Commission in due course, in line with their usual processes. The audit contains one qualification relating to one stream of income due to the administrative processes resulting in a limitation in the scope of audit. There is no suggestion that the accounts do not present an accurate picture of the party's financial position. One point of qualification has been made on the accounts. This means that there is one aspect of income that cannot be fully audited. The point of qualification on the accounts reads: during the course of our audit, we identified that original documentation in respect to some items of cash and cheques received for the current and prior year relating to membership, donations and raffle income were not kept by the party. We have been unable to satisfy ourselves by alternative means regarding the completeness of income in respect of the above limitation in scope. Consequently, we are unable to determine whether any adjustment to income is necessary in the current or prior year, and the potential impact on opening reserves accordingly. The party has always kept a careful online record of all income received and has already responded to the auditor's administrative recommendations. There is no suggestion of misappropriation of funds. Commenting, SNP Treasurer Stuart MacDonald said, "I am pleased to confirm that the Scottish National Party's accounts have been approved by the National Executive Committee for the year 2022, and we are in a position to meet our statutory obligations." The SNP's main source of income remains our membership, which we are immensely grateful for. The audit process is an important part of transparency in the political sphere, and I am grateful to colleagues in Party HQ and our auditors for delivering these accounts in a timely manner. We have already engaged with auditors and implemented administrative changes in accordance with their recommendations, and will continue to do so. And our learning from this process will also feed into the governance review, which is underway and which will see us adopt the best practice and procedures in terms of oversight. Sue Gray must wait for 6 months before she can start working for Sir Keir Starmer. Former civil servant Sue Gray will be able to start work as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff in the autumn after the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, ACOBA, said she needed to wait 6 months after leaving her role in the Cabinet Office. Sue Gray, who carried out the inquiry into Partygate, was forced to wait to take up her job with the Labour leader while the move was considered by ACOBA. Senior government figures had pushed for her to have to wait a year, but ACOBA has recommended the shorter period of 6 months. The report also reveals that Ms Gray was first approached by Starmer about the job in his team in late October 2022. In a phone call, he said Labour was preparing for government and raised the idea that she might serve the team in a senior capacity, possibly as Chief of Staff. Sue Gray said she had subsequent brief informal conversations with his team about a potential role for preparing for government were she to leave the civil service, and told ACOBA she did not believe there was a conflict with the specifics of her work. She told the committee there was no formal offer of employment until the 2nd of March 2023, the day after media speculation began about her potentially joining Starmer's team. After the appointment was announced, Sue Gray was criticised by some Conservatives, including Boris Johnson, who cast doubt retrospectively on her report into COVID lockdown gatherings at Number 10, which was completed in May last year. However, her former department said there was no evidence Gray made any decisions in expectation of the role with Labour, and the Partygate report was not material to this application in their view. Sir Keir Starmer, who had pledged to abide by ACOBA's ruling, said he was delighted that Ms Gray would be joining his team. The ACOBA report revealed that the UK government had raised some concerns about Ms Gray's move to Labour, potentially risking the integrity of the civil service. Her former department said a high-profile civil servant taking on a visible political role will clearly have implications for the perceived impartiality of the civil service. The government has separately been considering whether Sue Gray broke the Civil Service Code by entering discussions about the job while still employed in the Cabinet Office. It agreed to put this inquiry on hold while ACOBA was considering its recommendations. The ACOBA report said it was a matter for the government whether the code had been breached. The Eurozone's annual inflation rate fell by more than expected in June to 5.5%, amid sharp falls in the cost of energy, highlighting an increasingly stark divide with stubbornly high price growth in the UK. Consumer prices across the Eurozone rose by 5.5% in the year to June, down from an annual rate of 6.1% in May, and below forecasts for a reading of 5.6%, according to Eurostat. The EU Statistical Agency said energy contributed the most to the falling headline rate, after a 5.6% fall in the average price in the year to June, compared with an annual decline of 1.8% in May. Food, alcohol and tobacco inflation slowed from 12.5% in May, but remained in double digits at 11.7% as households continued to come under pressure from the rising cost of the weekly shop. The Eurostat figures contrast with the UK's annual inflation rate, which remains elevated in May at 8.7%, the highest level in the G7, amid growing fears the Bank of England will be forced to drive interest rates above 6% to try to bring the inflation back down to its 2.2% target. Separate figures published today showed the UK economy grew at the slowest rate in the G7 in the first quarter of the year, apart from Germany, which is in recession. Neil Shah, the director of research at the investment research firm Edison Group, said Brexit was partly to blame as increasingly stark differences begin to emerge between the UK and the Eurozone. Analysts have said the UK is facing larger inflationary pressures owing to labour shortages as companies push up wages in an attempt to fill near record numbers of job vacancies. The UK remains an outlier for increasing employment levels since the COVID pandemic, amid record levels of long-term sickness among working-age adults and post-Brexit migration rules, which have been highlighted by employers as one of the main causes of difficulties in recruiting staff. President Macron to hold crisis meetings as violence spreads, with 667 people arrested. President Emmanuel Macron is to head another crisis meeting of ministers as the French government struggles to contain an escalation of unrest that has spread from housing estates across the country to the centre of major cities after the police shooting of a teenager earlier this week. A total of 667 people were arrested across France into the early hours of this morning, officials said, as violence continued into a third night of riots triggered by the deadly police shooting of a 17-year-old of Algerian and Moroccan descent during a traffic stop. Fireworks and projectiles were thrown at police, bins were set alight, and buses and bus depots torched in towns and cities across the country. In some towns, public buildings were targeted. There was unrest in Dijon and several towns in Burgundy, clashes in the centre of Marseille in the south, and in and around Lille in the north. There were also disturbances in cities including Rennes and Lyon. Protesters clashed with police in Paris, burning bins, and for the first time there was looting of shops in the centre of the capital. When the Pablo Picasso housing estate in Nanterre, where the 17-year-old boy Nahel, who was shot by police, had grown up, clashes with police continued through the night. In central Paris, Nike and Zara stores were vandalised and looted, Le Monde reported, with 14 arrests made. Further arrests were made after shop windows were smashed along the famous Rue de Rivoli shopping street. At least 3 towns around Paris, including Clamart, Compiègne and Neuilly-sur-Marne, imposed full or partial nighttime curfews as a police intelligence report leaked to French media predicted widespread urban violence over the coming nights. Videos on social media showed numerous fires across the country, including at a bus depot in a suburb north of Paris and a tram attacked in Lyon. A 38-year-old officer was placed under formal investigation for voluntary homicide on Thursday. The Nanterre public prosecutor, Pascal Prache, said that Nahel died from a single shot through his left arm and chest while driving off after being stopped by police. The officer said he had opened fire because he feared that he and his colleague or someone else could be hit by the car, according to Prache. A lawyer for the officer accused of shooting the 17-year-old known as Nahel M in Nanterre, a suburb west of central Paris, said he had offered an apology to the teen's family. The U.S. Supreme Court strikes down the Colorado LGBTQ+ rights law. The U.S. Supreme Court has dealt a major blow to LGBTQ+ rights in America today by ruling that a Colorado civil rights law, which compels businesses and organizations to treat same-sex couples equally, is in violation of the right to free speech. The decision could open the door for businesses to refuse services to some couples based on their sexuality, but it could also have the same effect on the willingness of service based on a customer's race or religion in a significant Conservative ruling. The case was brought by Laurie Smith, the owner of 303 Creative, a web design company. Smith said she wanted to begin offering wedding websites, but does not want to make wedding websites for gay couples because of her religious beliefs. Smith has argued that her websites should be classed as art and therefore protected by her constitutional right to free speech under the First Amendment. The state of Colorado said this would violate the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, which says businesses cannot refuse services to customers based on sexual orientation, race, or disability. Elizabeth Sepper, a constitutional law professor at the University of Texas at Austin School of Law, who co-authored an amicus brief on the behalf of Colorado State on the case, told Colorado Public Radio last year that Smith's case should never have made it to the Supreme Court because there is no live dispute. Professor Sepper said, "This business does not do wedding services, has never designed a website for a wedding, and therefore doesn't face a live circumstance where a same-sex couple has asked for a wedding website." Smith was represented by the Alliance Defending Freedom, a right-wing Christian group which has frequently pursued cases which target LGBTQ+ people's rights. The Southern Poverty Law Centre classes the ADF as an extremist group and says it has supported the decriminalisation of sexual acts between consenting LGBTQ+ adults in the US and criminalisation abroad. The ScotGov and COSLA sign a new deal for local government. A landmark agreement to forge a stronger partnership between local and national government has been signed by First Minister Humza Yousaf and COSLA President Shona Morrison. The Verity House Agreement sets out principles for working together to empower local communities, tackle poverty, transform the economy and provide high-quality public services. It includes commitments to agree a new fiscal framework governing how local authorities' funding is allocated, reducing ring fencing and giving them greater control over their budgets to meet local needs. Regularly review councils' powers and funding with the expectation that services will be delivered at a local level unless agreed otherwise. Incorporate the European Charter of Local Self-Government into Scots law. Reform public services building on the partnership working established during the pandemic recovery. Develop a framework for collecting and sharing evidence to ensure progress is maintained. The First Minister said, "Today we have committed to build a stronger relationship with local government, with mutual trust and respect at its core." The Verity House Agreement is based on the idea that councils know best how to serve the people in their communities. By giving them greater flexibility over how they use their budgets and regularly reviewing their powers and funding, we can empower them to put that knowledge into practice, whether it's to tackle poverty, transform our economy to deliver net zero, or to provide the high-quality public services on which we all rely. This is just the start of the process, and we look forward to working further with COSLA and councils in the interests of the people of Scotland. Councillor Morrison said, "Signing the Verity House Agreement today at COSLA's offices is a clear sign that both parties want to reset the relationship between central and local government in Scotland. This agreement is about creating a new way of working as a partnership of equals, discussing key issues as early as possible, and using our collective expertise to deliver for communities across Scotland." The ScotGov Action Plan will ensure Scottish Welfare Fund reaches those most in need. Improvements to the way crisis support is delivered in Scotland are set out in a plan published today. The Scottish Welfare Fund provides a vital safety net which has paid out more than £380 million in emergency funds to more than 500,000 households over the last 10 years. The plan sets out 22 commitments to help the fund better address unmet needs and to make decisions more consistent across the country. Actions include a simplified application form, clearer guidance and better promotion to those who may not currently be being reached, including older people. Improved guidance on referrals to wider services such as debt and welfare advice will also aim to help people with their finances so they can avoid future crisis. Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville said, 10 years on from the introduction of the Scottish Welfare Fund, it is time to make improvements to ensure it continues to provide lifeline support. These actions will help to ensure that no matter where people live, they can access support they are eligible for in their time of need. The current financial pressures facing many households and the hardship that brings has shone a spotlight on the need for such emergency funds. And as the independent review of the fund made clear in March, the inadequacy of UK government welfare has contributed to increased demand. The publication of this plan demonstrates the Scottish Government's dedication to strengthening our social security system and working to best meet the requirements of people in Scotland. Scottish investment zones announced. Innovation and fair work will be at the heart of Scotland's first 2 investment zones, which aim to boost the economy, stimulate business growth and create high-quality, well-paid jobs. Glasgow City region and the North East will each be supported by up to £80 million in targeted investment, tax reliefs and other incentives over 5 years following a joint selection process by the Scottish and UK governments. Scottish ministers have tailored the UK government's investment zone model to ensure it aligns with the National Strategy for Economic Transformation and supports innovation in sectors such as net zero, digital and life sciences. There will be a strong emphasis on fair work, mirroring the arrangements for green free ports. The initiative is to be delivered by each area's regional economic partnership. They will propose which sectors should be the focus of support, taking into account regional strengths and activity within higher and further education institutions. Regional leaders, businesses and universities will take the lead in shaping and developing specific plans. The Scottish and UK governments have an equal role in decision-making and overseeing delivery. Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray said, "This is a milestone in the delivery of investment zones in a way that enhances Scotland's economy while aligning with our distinctive priorities." Scotland already has a strong track record in innovation and research, and the investment zones can build on these strengths. They will form part of a joined-up approach that draws on the expertise of our world-leading research, education and training institutions, dynamic business sector and skilled workforce, and will enable local communities to benefit. Well, that's it for this evening, but before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes, just like the one you're about to see coming up now. There's a wee extra clip to keep you going. Broadcasting Scotland was at the SNP's Scottish Independence Convention on Saturday, the 24th of June. Here, Nadina Hodgich speaks to councillors Siobhan Tolland, Serena Cowdy, and some conference delegates. The kind of thing that Broadcasting Scotland can do so much more of if we just get a wee bit more support from you out there. My name's Ruth Watson. Thank you very much for watching. Good night and thank you.
How are you finding the conference today?
It's really galvanising. It's a really positive and galvanising experience because I think it's the first time in what have been some challenging weeks for the party where we're all back together, and it's really, the fire is really kind of being set and burning really brightly, and I'm really enjoying it.
I think that, when Nicola resigned, there was a real kind of shock to the system, and I genuinely think that for the first time in a long time the path didn't seem very clear. But I think now that the path's set, and Humza, I think, laid that path out very clearly, galvanised, as Serena says, the audience. We know what we need to do now. And I was going to put something in to speak, and I keep saying this, but I don't think I need to now, because I think Humza set that pace. He was very clear, unapologetic. We're not going asking, we're going and we're saying this is the will of the Scottish people. So I think that is the big shift, I think, that we're doing. And that's what people needed to hear today, which is probably more important, actually.
You mentioned the new independent strategy is more concrete, more strict. So I was wondering, what do you think is the biggest selling point of this new strategy? How does it differ from the previous strategies that were implemented, particularly the one prior to the first referendum that happened?
In comparison to what, sorry?
In comparison to the previous independent strategies that the SNP has implemented?
I think it's clearer because we have a time frame to work within. So we're working towards the general election, which is probably going to be between the next 10 to 18 months. So we need to kind of galvanise for that. I think that the strategy is different in that before we've always focused on if we get this, can we have a referendum? Should we have a referendum? But this one, I think, is much more confident, much more bolshy, actually, in saying that we will start negotiating the terms of our extrication from the UK. And I think that's what's different. And that's what I was looking for.
Yeah. I would just say on that as well, there's a real sense of urgency, and I think Humza's delineated that very clearly, because we don't have a written constitution in the UK, and as a result of that, and I don't know if everyone's fully aware of that, the UK Parliament could at any time decide that the Scottish Parliament no longer exists. You know, we all need to think about that and focus on that, and that is a galvanising effect that I think just people have become much more conscious of, and I think, as I say, I've seen Humza speak on it a couple of times, and he's really focused on that and explain that to people really clearly, and it's shocking. You know, when you hear it, you know it, but when you hear it again, it's shocking. And that is the level of lack of democracy that we currently have in the UK. Devolution could be wiped out at a stroke of the pen at the minute, so we've got to get on with it.
Because the instinct of Westminster is no democracy. And I keep coming back to this immediately after the Brexit vote. Their instinct was to bypass the UK Parliament. And I think we should never forget that. Their instinct is to ignore the parliamentary process. And this is where it puts us extremely at odds. We the UK and we Westminster, actually more specifically, is that our fundamental base is on democracy, the right of the people of Scotland to decide their own fate. Westminster and the UK government at present seems to be embarking on you do what I say and be quiet. Actually, and that's where the clash is going to happen.
Yeah.
And how Labour negotiate and manage in between those two will be interesting to see, because I'm not quite convinced that they'll come out on the side of democracy as they should.
On the topic of Westminster's decisions, is there any chance, for instance, we're seeing currently witnessing the political and economic repercussions of Brexit, is there a possibility for similar disadvantages to happen when Scotland becomes independent, obviously through different situations, but is there any risks, and how SNP is planning to mitigate these risks?
So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that with any big transition there will be a period of change, and that by the nature of it is challenging. If you look at the difference between the Brexit campaign and the SNP materials that we're producing to actually show how we will be getting from A to B in a way that's very financially sustainable, very responsible, and takes account of everybody in society, to me it's night and day. We all know the Brexit campaign was made up on the back of a fag packet. There was like 3 lines, something about saving money, and frankly it was a lie. So, as I say, the contrast between the arguments and the thinking that we've put into trying to plan for that transition, I think personally couldn't be more stark.
And I think that's right, because I think that this is a managed transition rather than a chaotic transition. And I think, and this goes back to my original my thing earlier on, was that the fundamental difference is democracy. Brexit was never about democracy. This is. And actually, and I keep saying this, but it's that kind of, if in doubt, we go the democratic path. And I think what we'll see within Scotland in the transition to independence, because I'm pretty convinced that we are going to get there, is that it will be the consultation of the people of Scotland and how that path moves forward. Because if we're ever in any doubt, if we're unclear, then they'll let the people decide. And that's the exact opposite of what happened during the Brexit transition.
May I just make a point on a couple of the specifics that quite rightly people scrutinised in the last independence referendum? I use pensions as an example. So I believe that by the time we get to the referendum, people will have a really good understanding of our position on that this time, and that is, quite a big difference. So there will be a commitment that the pension level for people eligible for pension will never drop below the UK pension. And for example, that's very simple and easily understood. So it will, I believe, address and properly get to grips with these arguments, but also in a way that reassures people. And I understand why people, they felt it was trepidation last time. This is very different from what they're used to, but I think it's the responsibility of every single person, and especially me as an elected member and Siobhan as an elected member, to explain that to our constituents.
On the topic of economic policies, there was a poll in 2020 that showed that Scotland can experience up to 75% consideration for independence from their voters if the economic policies would be efficient and practical. Do you think that economic policies would actually be the key of Scottish independence in foreseeable future?
I think it'll be a key. I think that's where the democracy argument, the democratic argument, is so much part of the bedrock of what the SNP and the wider movement is about. But of course, like any responsible democratic movement, you have to have your economic policies and arguments absolutely set in stone. And you need the answers to the people who maybe aren't spending their whole lives like us talking about this and aren't necessarily massively politically educated, because why would they be? So yeah, I think both things are key.
I think, actually, interestingly, that what we have is it's not just a transition to independence, but there's also an economic transition as well. And I think that's why economics becomes so important, because what we've had since 1979, the Donna Thatcherism, is a very profit-driven economic structure. But what's happening within the independence movement and within the SNP is a rethink of the economic structure. The issue of the well-being economy, that the economy works for people, is a fundamental shift in our economic thinking. And I think it's not just what's going to drive the independence movement, I think it's what's going to make us win as well, because an economy driven for the people is something that we've all aspired to since Thatcher came to power in 1979 and absolutely destroyed the social contract and the safety net, the welfareism, the social security structure, all those things that we held dear. The economic policy destroyed that, and now we're reshifting that and rethinking that back into that, and I think that's tied in with independence quite clearly, actually.
Well-being economy is quite a challenging and quite difficult project to implement, considering the traditional approach to economy is always based on the GDP and the capital. So my question is, how does the SNP plan this transition to happen and for all Scottish citizens to have access to the policies that the well-being economy actually advocates for?
Do you want to go on that?
Well, I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? I was hoping she would answer that one.
No, I thought she was doing so well on the well-being economy, I'd let her go for it.
I honestly think that we have the infrastructure there. I think that the input of the Social Security Scotland, I think, is a great example of how that was done, how that was set up, but also things like the Scottish Child Payment. The infrastructure is there in order for us to take that forward. I think we've already changed that Scottish economic thinking. But actually, probably most importantly, it fits into what most Scottish people think, actually. It's that base knowledge and the base understanding that I think people do. How we do that? Well, we do it one step at a time, keep focused and make those changes and make sure that GDP doesn't dominate. That actually one of the things that on the council, and I don't know if Serena's thinking about that as well, one of the things that kind of I've been thinking about is how we set up practically a wellbeing economy at a local level. So it's thinking about those structures.
Yeah, so I represent one part of Angus, and Angus is part of the North East, and obviously we know how much the North East relies in the past has relied on the oil and gas industry, and I think part of the wellbeing economy, absolutely integral to it, is working out a way of environmentally friendly energy being absolutely front and centre, but also that people benefiting from the energy, everybody benefiting. So I think one way that we can be really different from the UK government, and I hope, everyone has different opinions on how far we want to go down this path, but I think a community, a model of energy production which benefits everybody in the community, as opposed to companies and shareholders and dividends. I think that's one example of how I personally foresee a really effective wellbeing economy working for everybody.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think that really what we've got is a re-envisioning of a nationalisation programme of the post-45 government. It's just unfortunate that Labour was never really able to sustain that path. And I think I think it was Hamza's election pitch was an equity share in the in the kind of the oil and gas and the renewable sector, actually, just importantly. So it is managing that transition. And again, I think it comes back to democracies. We democratise the economy by having initiatives, as Serena has suggested, taking a share in that process and making it work for the economy. These things are not that difficult to set up, actually. It's just within a UK structure. It's actually politically very contentious, but it shouldn't be. And within a Scottish economy, it won't be.
And of course, we have all the resources needed to do that. And, whenever anyone makes a commentary on to the effect that unionists often make the argument that somehow Scotland is leeching resources from the UK. I think, we can all really see that we have all the resources just fine for ourselves.
Well-being economy is one of the key aspects of SNP's independence plans. So I was wondering, do you think that well-being economy or the independence in general could actually help alleviate the consequences of the cost of living crisis?
Absolutely. I think that's. I think one of the reasons I think Humza is such a great leader is he has compassion right at the core of everything he does, and that includes the policy decisions and the policy making, and the whole team that I've seen now at the top of the SNP and within the wider movement is all really focused on that. And so from my perspective, I've got no confidence issues in that respect at all.
I think that, it's the whole point of the wellbeing economy is to make sure that people are not subject to crisis in that respect. We're not subject to the whim of the markets or international politics for that sense as well. If you look at what Norway has done, and Norway is always a great example because they have similar oil structures and so forth, is that effectively what they do, they manage the economy to stop the economic shocks. And what they also do is they set up a system that protects people at times of unemployment and financial kind of lack of resilience. The whole point of a wellbeing economy is to centre on to make sure that people are most vulnerable, because it's always our most vulnerable that suffer to the economic whims of the market, is make sure that these people do not suffer as a result of those. So managing the economic structure, managing the renewable sector in a way that works for people is radical, but it shouldn't be, because it's actually normal practice in areas like kind of Norway and the Nordic states, and actually in areas like Germany as well. These are common sense strategies that somehow seem separate from us. We're kind of, I hate to quote Winnie Ewan, but maybe we should, stop the bus. Was it stop the bus? We want to go on.
Stop the
world. Stop the world. We want to go on.
Even bigger than the bus.
Sorry, it would be better if I got the right quote. But you get my point. Actually, we're only catching up with other countries at this point.
Yeah.
So these things are common sense solutions, but taking that process and making sure that people first. And I think you saw that, and we were talking about that outside. I think you saw that in Humza's reaction to that woman, and that woman was clearly upset. It was a horrible case that she was talking about. His first instinct, as Serena says, was compassion. His first instinct was to reach out and see how that woman was, and that should be the centre of all our politics, and that's what wellbeing is.
Absolutely, and as both of us being local councillors, in the microcosm, that's what we do every day, and really try every day to deal with every single person in a compassionate and respectful manner, which does focus on and prioritise the most vulnerable in society. We recently we're both fortunate to be in SNP-led administrations, so when we were setting the budgets recently, we had our group discussion, and front and centre, top line was it needs to focus on the most vulnerable in our society. So you can see that percolating through into local government, SNP local government. I can reassure you of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that fundamentally that's a raison d'etre. That's why I joined the SNP, that's why I joined the independence movement, because my recognition was that it was the only way that we can build a fair society. I come from a socialist background, come from a traditional Labour background actually as well, but what you have to do is think about your best ways to get social justice, your best ways to get equality. And for me, that strategic positioning was, well, we do it through independence, and I still believe to this day that that's the only way that we're going to get anywhere close to the society that I think I want to see.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
What are your thoughts on the conference today?
Yes, it's a conference that we need to have. I think after the leadership election, I think everybody to sit down and have a big grown-up talk about how we get independence and strategy for the next election. So yeah, it's worthwhile, and it's apart from the heat, I have to come out just for a wee bit a cool down. But no, it's good, very good contributions from the elected members and also from the floor. So yeah, I'm glad I came up today.
How did you find today's convention?
It was really good, excellent support, and lots of stuff learned. And it's about bringing the support back together, and just a big family, and the belief that we can actually pull through for independence, hopefully by the end of this year.
We really enjoyed it, learnt a lot, and I think everybody's really on the same page now, and looking forward to winning independence at the election next year.
Well, I've just really enjoyed it today. I've come all the way down south in southern Scotland, from the beautiful Ettrick Valley, and I'm just really pleased at what I've seen today. It's not just rousing speeches, but I feel like something's going to be done, something's going to be started, and I'm very excited for the future in an independent Scotland.
Well, I wasn't sure what was going to happen here today, and I've been very impressed. I think it's been inspirational, and I feel that where there was a lot of negativity before, we're ready to get going. So, well, despite my years, I'm inspired to get.
All of the speakers were brilliant, and onwards to independence. Thank you.